Let it go, make my body go, make our bodies higher and higher.
Probably the most common tool for data management is called sorting. We've got a list on this worksheet called sorting. It's in the workbook 12-Data Management Features. The list is in no particular order right now, but you could easily imagine wanting to sort this list based on the employee name in column A, possibly by the department, hire date. In fact, almost any column in here could be the basis of sorting. Sorting most of the time for most people means rearranging the order of these rows. And if we sort, we want all the information for a single person, for example, Larry Weber here. We want this row to move up or down into its appropriate place based either on what's in column A or column C or whichever column we want to sort by. Most sorting means rearranging by rows. There is an option to rearrange by moving columns left and right. That's rarely used. We'd like to sort this data, and we could sort it in any number of different ways and combinations of ways as well. The Data tab in the ribbon has a Sort button. If you're on the Home tab, you'll also see a Sort off to the right, Sort and Filter. But before we begin sorting, we should always scope out our data. Maybe somebody sent this data. I took a quick look at it. It looks okay. Is there an empty row down here or one below that? Do we have some kind of subtotals in it? You should know your data well enough or at least check it out. A couple of tips will help here. The idea could be, before sorting, maybe we should highlight all of our data. Well, that's okay, and it's certainly not wrong, but if you've got thousands of rows, that might take a little bit of time. So, a couple of pointers about working with data. Before considering sorting or filtering or some of the other features available, make sure the list you're working with has not any empty rows in it or empty columns. Be sure to get rid of those. And one way to check that out is to simply click in the data and press Control A. Now that highlights all the contiguous data. Possibly we could scroll down using the scroll bar on the right-hand side. We can also press Control Period a few times. That just moves the active cell around the corners of the range. If it takes you down to the bottom, it looks like the bottom, but scroll a little bit more. So, what that means, and you don't do this all the time, but after doing that a few times, particularly if you work with your data frequently, then when it comes time to sort, you do not have to highlight all your data. Just click within it, and you can go to the Sort command. Now, one other aspect of sorting. Make sure that the entry across the top of the list, it doesn't literally have to be row 1, but it often might be, get those titles into a single row. If they're 2 rows, redesign them somehow, make them be in a single row. That makes life a lot simpler, not only with sorting, but with using other data management tools as well. There could be data off to the right, and there is in this example. There's a tax table. Maybe eventually we're going to look up some tax rates for compensation amounts and so on. This data is important, but maybe it's not related to the sorting that you want to do over here. As long as you have one empty column separating the data you want to sort from the other data, you'll be okay. So, we begin the sorting process either from the Home tab or from the Data tab. Just click within the data. Maybe we're on the Home tab, we'll start over there. Sort and Filter, and then we see actually 3 sorts here. Choose Custom Sort. Now, when you sort data, you have the ability to sort based not just on one column, but on many columns. As we look in the background here, there are many different departments. Some departments are quite large. One of them might even have over 100 people working in it. Now, if we're going to get a list of people from that department, we probably want to also have them sorted as well. In other words, within each department, let's also sort maybe by status. And in some departments, we might have a lot of people with the same status. So in order to track down people and find records more easily, we might have a multi-layer sort, multi-level here. So we begin by adding a level. We want the major grouping here, and we can click right in here. We see our field names. We want it to be by department. Within each department, we want to break that down or sort it, group it, it's another way to say it, by status. And if we know there are going to be a lot of people in some situations that are in the same status, same department, let's add another level. Maybe years of service. Now, the first 2 fields were text fields, and you'll notice off to the right, the order is A to Z, ascending. Suppose we indicate now we want to put in years of service. That says smallest to largest. It might be more to our liking to put in largest to smallest, but we can go either way. In older versions of Excel before 2007, you could only sort at most on 3 fields at the same time. Now, in this list, and you can certainly imagine larger lists than this even, we might have a lot of people with the same years, same status, same department, so let's maybe add another level. We can now sort on up to, believe it or not, 64 levels. I'm only sorting on 4 here. So make the 4th level perhaps be employee name. Now, one other thing to look at when you click on sort. The box to the right usually is correct. My data has headers. You'll notice in the background that row 1 is not highlighted. Now, if I were to uncheck this, it is highlighted, and row 1 is going to be treated like all the others. It's going to end up in the middle there somewhere. We don't know where. But most often you do have headers, and this is checked. If for some reason it isn't, and you do have headers, well then by all means, do check it. And the visual usually confirms what's going on. So we're about to click OK, and we'll see that our list is grouped primarily, or in a major way, is another way to say it, by department. Within each department by status, then years, and employee name. Click OK. Here are all the account management people. How are they grouped? We got a bunch of contract people in account management, then full-time, and then later we'll have half-time and a few hourly. We see it like that. Within one of these, the full-time list is quite large there. How are these people in order? They're in descending order by column F. We don't see the heading right now. There it is, years. And so we've got a group of people here. Here are people in the same department, same status, same years. And what order are they in? Alphabetically by name. We see that over there. If you only sort occasionally, use this method. Use that button that you can get to either from the Home tab by way of Sort Filter and then Custom Sort, or on the Data tab. It's this button right here. It takes us to the same dialog box. Now, there's another way to sort, and sometimes it's faster, and it usually comes after you've mastered sorting or you feel comfortable with it. Suppose we want to sort this list right now by employee name. We don't have to go into the full sort feature with this button. Ascending order, AZ, right here. Click this. The concern, the worry is, are we going to rearrange only the data in column A? Now, if you click column A, possibly you're on the way to sorting only the data in column A. So click on either A1 or any cell within here. And if you click AZ, no questions asked, what happens? If you're not sure about that, be sure ahead of time you check out one of the names. But this has worked, and we now see the list in alphabetical order based on employee name. Now, an important aspect of using this button or the one below it is that it remembers what occurred before. So right now the list is in order by employee name. Suppose a few minutes later, a few hours later, or tomorrow, you say, I need to sort this by department. Well, we'll click in column C, click the AZ button. It's in order by department, but what do we see within a certain department? They're in order alphabetically by their names, because that's the order that it had been in before we sorted here. So you could think of these sorts as being cumulative. The last sort overrides the previous order, but it does remember. So for example, if we click in column D, we're about to get a status sort, but within each status, there'll be an order by department. So AZ, all the contract people together, but as we scroll down the list, we see they're in order alphabetically by department. And within each department, for example, this one, what order are they in? Alphabetically by name, because that was the sort that preceded the previous sort, which was by department here. So, as you get more comfortable with sorting, these buttons often are faster. But of course, it's handy and important sometimes to go back to the full button. Check this out, maybe when you're doing multiple levels. There is an option out here for sorting by columns. We won't cover that. It's not as commonly needed. In fact, probably less than 1% of sorting is based on rearranging the order of columns. So sorting is a powerful feature. Again, proceed cautiously if you don't use this very often, and always check the results. And remember, if something has gone awry, you can undo the action. No question, though, that sorting data is something we quickly want to do, and we can get there very fast. Most of the time, sorting seems practically instantaneous. We're looking at a worksheet called Subtotals in the workbook 12-Data Management Features. As we scroll up and down here, we can quickly see this list is sorted by department. And you might not notice it's also sorted within that by status. We might want to insert subtotals every time there's a change in the department. We've got lots of different departments represented in this list. Doing this manually would take quite a while. And since we've also got it sorted within that by status, we might even want to have a multi-layered set of subtotals here. We can do this efficiently with a feature called subtotal. It's on the Data tab, far right. You must sort the data ahead of time if you expect coherent results. So let's say, this example here, it's been done. Active cell can be anywhere within the data. We go to the subtotal button, Data tab in the outline group. Every time there's a change in what? Department. Now often this might be employee name because it's the first column. If you've used it recently, maybe you'll see a different name. Make sure it's what you mean it to be. Every time there's a change in department, we want to automatically insert a subtotal. Use the function, probably sum, but not necessarily. We want to be tabulating probably the totals of fields, but in some cases it might make more sense to do average. What we would like to be able to do, but can't do, is sum certain fields and average others. So pick sum, it's likely to be your best choice. Now, which fields might we want to total? Excel makes some guesses here, often gets them right. Years, compensation. We wouldn't want to do job rating because a total there wouldn't really mean much. Farther down, new comp. Now, if you've used this recently, as I have, you might see checks in the correct place, but always check it out and possibly consider some other fields as well. And click OK. As we start to scroll downward, we will see eventually. As soon as we come to the end of account management, there's a total. Now, because we haven't frozen the top row, we're not seeing right away what this is. This represents years of service. This is the compensation, and here's the adjusted compensation. We're seeing totals for these three fields. Here's the ADC group, much smaller totals, and so on, all the way down the list. Also of note is on the left-hand side of the screen, we see what are called outlining symbols, a horizontal 1, 2, 3. The current view is showing detail and subtotals. That's level 3. Button number 2, and we're seeing subtotals and grand total. Click 1, we're only seeing the grand total. So we can do this back and forth, comparing these. If you're doing this for a presentation and someone in your audience is looking at this and wants to see some of the detail, for example, in the environmental compliance total, what are the numbers behind this? There's a plus off to the left here. Click this. And now we see the detail for that group, at least for the moment. All right, we see it, we view it, maybe we talk about it. We collapse this with the minus button off to the left here. We're back here, so we can expand these individually if we wish. Now, the list also was sorted by status within each department. We could also, without getting rid of these, introduce another level, provided the sort had been done ahead of time, and it had been. Subtotal, let's go back, and also have a subtotal every time there's a change in status. Now, let's say we want the same kinds of totals here, but be careful, be sure and uncheck replace current subtotals if you wish to see both levels. Right now, the check is there, meaning it would replace the current ones. We still want to see those, but let's also see the new ones as well. So we're going to see a multi-level here of subtotals. Click OK. And now we see. Within account management, and we see that total right here, we see the breakout. We can make the column wider here with the 4 different status types. Now, some departments don't have 4 status types within them, so we'll see, for example, here, only 3. Some cases, only 2. But we are seeing the breakout here. Remember, the data originally was sorted, and we can see it again by clicking, and notice we now have 4 levels out here, clicking level 4. That's all of the detail level, as well as the various subtotal levels. So there's the subtotal for contract within account management, and then full-time within account management, and then half-time, and also hourly, and there's the grand total for account management, and so on. Now, if you use this feature often, I think you'd recognize that if you like to sort your data frequently, if you need to do that, if you're trying to filter data, or if you're going to create pivot tables off of this, these are in the way, and you need to get rid of them. So you might think of it as a feature you use from time to time. It's easy to create once you try once or twice. I think you'll see how fast it is. But there's something else you might want to consider doing here. I'm going to collapse this to show just the various levels of subtotals. And we can see by the row numbers here, and of course we know from the visual, we are not seeing all the data, and that's fine. But you might want to copy this, either in its current form, or maybe if we collapse this even further by clicking the 2 of those outline symbols, number 2. What if you wanted to copy this to a different worksheet? I'm going to zoom back a bit. Highlight all of this. You might want to copy it. Now, we don't have an empty worksheet right now, so here's a plus button out here to the right. I'm going to click that. That puts in a temporary new sheet to the right called Sheet 1. Let's go back to our data. If you highlight this and copy it, you can press Control-C or right-click Copy. If you then go to that new sheet, or any other location, and paste, Control-V is one way. We could also do this with right-click, or on the Home tab, we could do a paste. And we say, well, wait a minute here. Looks like we're getting everything. And that's what happens. Now, you can imagine wanting to get just the visible data. And there is a way to do this, although it's fairly obscure as to how to find it. There is a keystroke shortcut. It's Alt-semicolon, but if you didn't know that, it would be tough to find it. On the Home tab in the ribbon, far right is a button called Find and Select. And buried in there is a feature called Go to Special. And in there's a choice called Visible Cells Only. I couldn't have buried it any further, I don't think. Click OK. Now that selects just the visible cells. Then if you were to copy, right-click Copy or Control-C, it's only going to pick up each row or each portion of row individually. And the visual sort of suggests that. So then if we went to that empty sheet, or the sheet that was empty, and paste this off to the right, we'll see, by comparison, it's going to be much shorter. Control-V, there we go. And we see what's happening out there. Now, let's go back to subtotals. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting this is a feature that everybody needs, but it is in contrast with data that you work with if you're using a filter. And you might not have seen the movie on filter just yet, but if you do filter data, you don't worry about this feature. If you copy-paste filtered data, it automatically picks up just the visible data. So once again, in this list right here, if you'd like to copy this and paste it as you see it, without picking up the hidden data there, simply highlight the data, either press Alt-semicolon, not easy to remember exactly, or go to Find and Select, Go to Special, and select the Visible Cells Only. Then copy and paste the data if you only want to get this data. Now, going back to our data here, remember, we can display the detail this way or more detail. If we've got 2 levels here, we can do it this way. At some point, if we no longer want to use the feature for a while, we'll simply go to the Data tab, Subtotal, off to the right. Sounds drastic, but remove all simply means remove these subtotals. And we're back to here. Try this a few times. You realize it's relatively fast once you get used to it. It does give us some good, quick summary information. It's called Subtotal on the Data tab in the ribbon. If you work with lists of data, there are certainly times when you're saying, I don't need to see all this for the moment. I want to focus on just the people in a certain department, maybe marketing. Or at another time, I just want to see the full-time people here. Or at another time, let's focus on the people with the best or the worst job rating. Any number of different reasons for not wanting to see all the data and focus on just the data you need to see. The feature's called Filter. You can, from the Home tab, far right, click Sort and Filter, and then Filter to get to it that way. You could also jump over to the Data tab, and you'll see Filter there as well. As with other data management tools, make sure that your data has no empty rows or columns within it. If you work with the data frequently, that's not a concern. Simply click on one of the cells within the data. Here's Filter right here. Click it. And we see filter arrows at the top of each column. And it's almost self-explanatory. An easy feature to use. Let's click the drop arrow for department. We get an alphabetical list of all the departments. We might want to view 1 or 2 of these at the same time. Let's unselect them all and begin by maybe clicking one of these. How about human resources? Click that, click OK. We're only seeing those people. Lower left-hand corner tells us we're seeing 9 of them out of 741. And the blue row numbers we see to the left accentuate the idea we're only viewing some of the rows. We want to get back the data? Clear, just to the right of filter, brings back all the data. Now, sometimes we might be looking at multiple columns at the same time. In other words, multiple filtering. Let's say we want to look at one of our larger departments, manufacturing. Click the drop arrow, unselect them all, and let's say we want to look at manufacturing, as well as manufacturing admin, related departments. Click OK. 158 records. Now, it's important because we're going to be considering some of the payroll changes we're going to be making. Let's just focus on our full-time people for a while within this department. Click the drop arrow here, unselect all of them, and check full-time. So instead of 158 records, we're now seeing 85. And for another reason, maybe at the same time or maybe later, we might be saying, let's focus on just our top performers, those with a job rating of 5. Click the drop arrow, unselect them all, select only 5 instead of 85 records. Now we're seeing 21 records. We see this in the lower left-hand corner. Anytime you see the blue row numbers, that means we're not seeing all the rows. And of course, that's what filtering really means. We're hiding rows for the data we do not want to see. And at different times, you can imagine putting together filtering from different columns. The columns that currently are in play, or the ones where filtering is active, we can see a slightly different icon. It looks like a filter, columns C and D and I at the moment. We can again clear if we wish, come back here, bring back all the data. Now, department is a text field, and when we click the drop arrow here, we see text filters. Equals, does not equal, begins with, ends with. We can use this from time to time also. The compensation column, column J or column H, either one, is a numeric column. And there we see number filters. And so we've got some different choices out here. Some are the same, but some are also different here. Greater than, less than, or between. So we might choose between, and a different dialog pops up. Maybe we only want to focus on those people whose salaries are in the 60,000 to 70,000 range. So greater than or equal to 60,000. Less than or equal to, well, maybe, or how about just less than? Another choice. Less than 70,000. Another way of saying this is all those salaries that begin with 6, between 60 and 70,000, but not 70,000 exactly, less than. Click OK, and we're seeing 119 records here. They're not in any particular order here, so we also have an option with the arrow here to sort largest to smallest. Now this will only use the visible rows to move the data up and down. In other words, the rows will be shuffled up and down, but the row numbers to the left, rows 5, 11, 12, 15, will stay the same, but different data will be in them. Same row numbers, but now we've sorted the data, just the visible data, to be in descending order. So sometimes that's necessary as well, too. Back to the clear button again. There's also a date column in here, and as we click the drop arrow for date, recognize date filters, a ton of choices here. Now, if this is historical data, we might want to see data from last week, next month, this month, last month, so on. Not next month if it's financial data, but if it's prediction data, of course, next month. We see lots of choices in here. Quarters. Looking forward, looking backward, depending upon the nature of the data. And don't overlook there's an arrow down here, all dates in the period. We can even narrow them down by month. Imagine how valuable this would be for analyzing sales data. And we can do it by quarter as well. So lots of choices here. And we can do other things with this feature too. In column A over here, we can narrow down a list. Now I'm looking for somebody named Rick. Possibly I could use text filters. What would we choose here? It's actually at the end, ends with Rick. Possibly we could do that. We can also click in this search panel right here. As I type R, I, the list below is being filtered. I only see entries where R and I appear. C, the list has gotten smaller. K, it's even smaller. I could click OK now, or that's it. There it is. But notice all those contain R-I-C-K in different locations. If the list is short enough, we wouldn't worry about it. You might have seen another movie called Find and Replace where we did something similar with this. Filtering often is faster. We see these. Now we might want to print this or copy this. If we highlight this and paste it, say on an empty sheet, automatically we will get only the visible data. We don't worry about having to select the visible data. It happens automatically. To get our data back again, clear. Lots of choices here, generally easy to use. We're doing no damage, we're simply hiding data as we use the filter capability found on the Data tab in the ribbon. In this worksheet called Splitting Data, we're looking at two common problems that you might encounter when you're working with lists. Whoever prepared this list wasn't really thinking too much as the names are entered in column A, that later we might want to sort this list by last name. And you can see how the names are put in, first name, last name. We cannot sort this list by last name in its current form. And also, depending on the size of the list, and maybe it's quite large, we cannot sort this list by state, nor can we sort it by zip code based on the current arrangement. As a general rule, but nobody's stopping you, don't put city, state, and zip together in the same column. You can't sort by state, can't sort by zip code. And with names, even though you might not be thinking about it initially, keep in mind, eventually you will want to sort by last name. Now, there are a couple of approaches to this. In this movie, we'll be talking about a feature called text to columns. It begins, first of all, with a recognition. We don't want to keep the names the way they are in column A. We want a way to sort this data on the basis of last name. And we can't do that until we separate these into separate columns. We might want to rejoin them, maybe not, but let's focus on the idea that we want to separate these in separate columns. Now, you could say this is rigged a little bit. Nobody has a middle name. We don't see any middle initials in this list. If we did, it would take just a bit longer. But the feature we'll be using, after selecting the column, is found on the Data tab in the ribbon. It's called Text to Columns. But if we start that right now, we've got a problem because we don't have any additional columns in which to split this data out. So let's insert a few columns. Now, even though we know our data reasonably well, let's say we know that all the names are in two parts, let's put it in two columns just to play it safe. Highlight columns B and C, right-click, and insert. Temporary new columns. Then click column A or simply select the cells, either way. Text to columns. The description is quite lengthy. Split a single column of text into multiple columns. For example, you can separate a column of full names into separate first and last name columns. That's exactly what we're doing here. Click that option. This brings on the screen the Convert Text to Columns wizard, step 1 of 3. Often you don't need all 3 steps. The key choice here in the initial step 1 is delimited. Characters such as commas or tabs separate each field. In this case, it's a space, but that's what we want, delimited. Fixed width would mean every 4 characters exactly, or every 8 characters. We don't have that situation here. The names are of different length. Delimited, then next. Now, if you've used this recently, maybe you used tab, maybe you didn't. That's not getting in the way here. We can pretty much ignore it. Below we see a data preview, but we haven't chosen anything yet. How about space? In other words, what separates the names the way we would like to see this? Space in the preview below shows us what we're about to do. We're going to split the names. Might take you a long time to scroll through this. Don't necessarily have to do that. It looks like this is going to work. We're on step 2. We need only click Finish. We're done here. The data has been split into 2 separate columns. Now, one choice is simply to say, keep them this way. Relabel this, call it first name. Relabel this, call it last name. Then we'd get rid of the empty column if you had an extra one. Right-click and delete. Readjust the column widths here, put in the appropriate labeling, and then we could sort by last name. So that's commonly done. So I'll change this here to be first name, and over here, last name. Now, is it better to put these back together into a single column? Santos, comma, Evan, Wiley, comma, Stewart, Powell, comma, Brittany, and so on. We could do that. It might save us a little bit of horizontal space on the screen, but there's certainly nothing wrong with what we see here. You might eventually add another column for middle initial. It just depends upon the individual needs, but this is certainly acceptable here, and we can sort our list by last name. And so what I can do right now, with the active cell here and all of our columns back together, on the Data tab, I can simply click the single AZ button, and now they're sorted by last name. And that's handy and fast. Now, we've got a similar problem in column D. City, state, zip. Now, some of those city names are two names. Here's Huntington Beach, and there might be a California city named Marina del Rey Mar Vista or something like that. Some city names might have 4 or 5 names, so we really can't split these by space. The state and the zip code we separate by space, but it's the comma that we're looking for here that would allow us to split this data to at least isolate the city. And what I'm getting at here is the idea we might have to use this feature multiple times. So let's insert 4 or 5 new columns. We can always get rid of the empty ones that we don't need. Drag across right here, right-click, and insert. Once again, we'll use this feature called text to columns. Delimited, next. Now, we don't want to use space as the separator. We can see in the preview already, La Palma, Kansas, looks different than the others there. As we move up and down, there's Huntington Beach. See how beach comes into a different column here, into the state column and so on. So we don't want space here. Uncheck that. Click comma and look at the preview. It looks like it's isolating the cities properly. And as we move up and down, we see those multiple named cities here and there. But the state and the zip are off to the right. So this won't separate those just yet. We want to use comma. Let's do a finish. Now, sometimes you'll get this message even if there's no data there. Let's click OK. And what we should do is just to make sure, click in column F. Is there any data here really? Control down arrow we can press. Goes all the way to the bottom, nothing there. So there really wasn't anything there. So, we've taken care of part of this. We can double click the boundary between D and E. We've isolated the city. We see it here. State and zip code are separated by a space, but you might notice there's a leading space there. So let's do this again, same feature. We might end up with an empty column temporarily, but we can deal with that. Text to columns. By the way, it is possible here that some of those zip codes might be the 7-digit zip code, but that wouldn't stop us here. It wouldn't get in the way. We're going to be using space now, only space. Not comma, but space. And once again, the preview seems to be doing what it's supposed to do. We will have an extra column temporarily here. It'll be empty. We can get rid of it. Finish. And once again, we get this message. Click again, just to make sure. We could go off to the right. Click in this column out here. Did we get any data out here somehow? Control down arrow? Nope. Control up arrow. So, first order of business, let's bring this back together a little bit. Readjust the column widths. See what we've got. We've got an empty column E. We can delete that. Right click, delete. Looks like column G is empty. Right click, delete. So, city, state, zip. Looking the way it should. Now in our list here, if we want to sort this by state and within that by city, we would sort by city first. We can click in column D anywhere. Click the AZ button. We're sorting our list by city, but they are in different states. So then let's click in column E, any one cell, and click AZ. And there we have our sort. So here are all the cities within Alaska, then all the cities within Alabama, and so on. Now we're able to work with the data efficiently. Anytime you're working with data that has city, state, zip, make sure they're in separate columns. If not, you'll have to use the features we just saw here using, on the data tab, text to columns. And earlier we saw how to do that with the names as well. If you saw the previous movie on splitting data, you saw how we could deal with data like this and split those names into separate columns using a text to columns feature. But on this sheet called Flash Fill, we're going to be using a relatively new tool available starting in Excel 2013. It's called Flash Fill, and many times it's going to be faster and better, though it doesn't ultimately have as much flexibility as text to columns. If you slide over the Flash Fill button on the Data tab, the description reads, automatically fill in values. Enter a couple of examples you want as output, and keep the active cell in the column you want filled in. Doesn't tell us everything, but it sounds kind of interesting. Look at column A. 2 problems. The major one is we cannot sort this list by last name. The minor problem, possibly, is all uppercase. We'd prefer to have just the first letters capitalized. I'm going to insert a new column to the left of column B. Right-click, insert. Now, the flash fill idea is I'm going to type the data here the way I want it to appear. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to be typing the names in reverse order, Santos, comma, Evan, and I'm only going to be capitalizing the first letters. Santos, comma, space, Evan. Enter. And now I'm going to start typing the second name, the capital W. And in effect, Excel is saying, I see what you're doing. I'm going to repeat this down the column. And you can probably see in gray the other names are about to appear. I'll simply press enter. We're all set. We don't have any formulas here or anything. We could get rid of column A. Now, I'm going to undo this with Control Z and go back and show you another way to do it. Let's imagine, as I press Control Y to undo the undo, I've just typed in Evan Santos. The other technique for using flash fill is to complete the single entry, then go to that feature, flash fill. Click it, and Excel does the job. It even did this on A1, which isn't quite what we want. Now, where flash fill isn't so good is that if we had some of the names here with middle initials, or maybe some of them were not capitalized, we might run into some oddities there. By all means, experiment with it. And you saw what happened here, and you saw how fast it was. And we don't have any formulas here or anything like that. It's looking good. And we could have gone in different directions with that too. I'm going to try this also over in column D. There we've got the problem of city, state, zip in the same column. We did the same sort of thing in the previous movie with that feature, text to columns. Let's try it now with flash fill. Moving to the right here. I'm going to insert 3 or 4 columns to the right of column D. Simply click column E, right click, and insert. Now eventually we might want more columns, but let's isolate the cities here. I'm going to type right here, Eau Claire, and press enter, and now type W, capital W, and right away Excel sees what I'm doing. It's sensed not that I typed 2 words necessarily, but I typed in all the data to the left of the comma. And so the flash fill technique recognized what I was doing. When I typed the W, it filled in Waterbury. I simply pressed enter. Now, I could have put in additional columns earlier. Maybe I just wanted to isolate the city. But if I want to isolate the other 2 fields, drag across here, right-click, insert. Make this a little bit narrower for the moment. I'm going to type WI. This time I'll use flash fill. By the way, there's a keystroke shortcut. It's Control E. Let's try that. Control E. Works just perfectly. The heading up above didn't do quite right. We don't worry about that too much. Off to the right. Now what? The zip code? 87137. I'm pressing Control Enter so the active cell doesn't move, and I'll simply press Control E, shortcut for flash fill. We've got that too. So the headings aren't quite right, but the data's in place. Readjust this. Get our headings. We might have to type these. Well, zip code's okay. Right here, just state, of course. That's fine. And right here, city. And eventually what we would do here is, of course, we don't need column D. Right-click and delete. And over here to the left, same idea with the choice here. We could possibly just move this to the right or copy it, either way, and get rid of column A. We don't need that anymore. So flash fill is a great feature. You do need to experiment with it a little bit with certain kinds of data, but often it's faster and more efficient than text to columns. It's just that when you get unusual situations, you might have to revert to the text to columns capability. But this is an attention getter, and you saw how efficiently it worked in these examples here, not only for splitting the cities out, but also for the name. There's another use here too, and what I'm going to do is backtrack a little bit and insert 2 new columns here, right-click, insert, and start over going in a different direction. What if the names were separate from the beginning? I'm going to type the last name here, Santos, press Control Enter, flash fill, Control E, works just fine. I'll go to the right, type Evan, Control Enter, keeps the active cell in place as I complete the entry. Once again, Control E, the shortcut for flash fill. That's all taken care of too. I don't need column A anymore. Right-click and delete. But I might want to join these names. So let's put in a new column again. Insert. Click here. Now I'm going to type Evan Santos. Or if it's important that I need to sort the data but I want to take up less space, I'll put in Santos, comma, Evan. Probably the better long-range choice because we can sort. Now, idea there. Once again, we could activate flash fill with Control E. Now notice here, different than the other examples, it's looking to the right instead of to the left. Nevertheless, it's working just fine. We're all set. Adjust this, get rid of these, we're back in shape. So I think you can sense here we've got some real power with this feature called Flash Fill. We can make all the column headings bold. Simply click here, Home tab bold, or Control B, either way. And we're in great shape. Just all the columns, so on. So, a vital tool for cleaning up data, Flash Fill. If you work with lists of data, particularly if the list has been worked on by different people and you're getting data from different sources, you sometimes encounter the problem of duplicate records. And on this worksheet called Remove Duplicates, we're seeing, for example, in rows 5 and 6, the same data, exactly, all the way across. We also have 2 Thomas Allens, but those are actually different people, and you can see the data. Now, when you find one of these, of course, you're going to get rid of the data, but the worry is, how many others do we have? The feature we're about to show you, called Remove Duplicates, doesn't require that the data in question, for example, these 2, they don't have to be adjacent to one another. They could be widely dispersed. You're likely to see them because you sorted the data, and you see one here, but who has time to go through a potentially huge list here? As I double-click the bottom edge of this cell, we see it goes down to row 743. Let's go back up top. Got some other duplicates down here. Looks like there's one there too, also Frank Wiggins right above this. But let's get rid of all of these, and make sure we get rid of all of them. Double-click the top edge, we'll go back up top. Simply click within the data. Make sure, as always, when you work with a lot of features in the data management category, that the data is all together, no empty rows, no empty columns. The feature called Remove Duplicates. Delete duplicate rows from a sheet. That's what we want to do. Remove duplicates. We can do this by not necessarily selecting all the columns, although that often makes good sense, but we want to check to see if there's a duplicate all the way across into column J. Every single cell duplicating another one. And again, even though in the background we see 2 Michael Atkins in adjacent rows, they don't necessarily have to be there. But we're about to see one of them disappear. Click OK. And that's happened. And the message, 22 duplicate values found and removed, 720 unique values remain. The wording is a little bit strange maybe, 22 duplicate values. How about 22 duplicate rows? All the way across, there's only 1 Michael Atkins row in this list. Click OK, double click this cell, down to the bottom, and we see we got fewer records than we did before. An easy feature to use and a vital cleanup task that we sometimes need to do. Remove duplicates found on the Data tab. Excel's data validation feature is different than a lot of other data management features in that it's mostly about data before it goes into a worksheet, not after. And we're looking at a sheet called Data Validation in our workbook called 12 Data Management Features. Let's imagine we're about to create a list here. We've got an ID number, compensation, status, department. The ID numbers must be 6 characters. They might be all numbers, they could be all letters, they could be a combination of either. Let's say it's a combination of letter and numbers in our example here. Let's select column A. Before using the data validation feature, highlight the cells where you want the rule to be in place. These are referred to as data validation rules. We go to the Data tab in the ribbon, and we have a choice called Data Validation. Pick from a list of rules to limit the type of data that can be entered in a cell. We're controlling data before it goes into a list. The Data Validation dialog box has 3 tabs. A Settings tab gives us some different choices. Text length, whole number, decimal. We might want to choose whole number in some case if it were all numbers. We could set it to a certain length or make it between a certain set of numbers, something like that. If it's a mix of letters and numbers, as it might be in this case, we can choose text length, and this will allow numbers as well. And we can set this to be between certain ranges or exactly equal to. We're going to say equal to here. Maybe in this case it's 7. Now that means it has to be exactly 7. If the ID numbers vary, say between 5 and 7, we would say between, get a dialog box like this and put in a 5 and a 7. Let's say in this case it's exact, equal to, and we'll make it be 7. So we're setting up a rule for here. We can even provide an input message. Here's a box right here, And we can give it a title if we want. We could say caution, warning, reminder, something like that. We can put in a colon if we wish, not necessary. And then a description. Must be exactly 7 characters long. We could be more specific and say something like it must begin with a letter. Now, maybe most of the people doing the data entry know that, so we don't necessarily say that. If you provide an input message, and it's optional, you'll see that anytime you click in the cells that you selected ahead of time. It must be exactly 7 characters long. Well, let's try this with only 5 characters. We get a pop-up message. This value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. If we click retry, we're still in edit mode. If we click cancel, we're out of here. So I'll click retry, and maybe I just forgot to type in that final 2 characters there, the 1, 2. Looks good now. Enter. It's acceptable. Too many characters? Doesn't work. Now, it could be all numbers. That's acceptable. It could be all letters. That's acceptable too. The only restriction we're saying here is 7 characters long. So I think you can see how that will work in different situations. Now, the compensation numbers here, the salaries, for example, might have an upper limit. They might have a range limit. Maybe everybody in this organization is below 125,000. Maybe that's for now the top total. We don't want any typos here, nor do we want any malicious entry here of higher values. So let's put a restriction here by way of data validation. Settings, this time allow. Now possibly with salaries it could be whole numbers or decimals, either one. How about whole numbers here? Let's restrict these either within a certain range, minimum, maximum, or maybe in our example here, we just want to make sure that these are less than, possibly less than or equal to, either way, the maximum, which is 125,000. We could provide an input message. I won't do that this time. Just click OK. So, that's okay. That's acceptable. That's not. Same idea. You also have the option here of putting in what's called, by going back to data validation here, you could put in an error alert that describes why that was unacceptable. And sometimes people like this because it looks like they know how to tweak the software. So I'm going to put in a message here, incorrect. I might follow it with a bunch of exclamation points to get attention. And the error message is, must be under 125,000. Or less than or equal to, depending on how you might say it or what the exact number is. There we go. So, next time we make a mistake here, we get this message. And again, sometimes people do get a little bit sarcastic or cute or funny in these messages. It's kind of fun to play with, possibly. But that's not the key thrust, of course. The idea is we are controlling what goes into the column here. Now, a showpiece feature, data validation, is the idea of a pick list. And people love this because they're not typing. They're going to pick from a list. Now, right now, we see 2 lists, one in column G, one in column H. Eventually, we will want to move these out of the way. But when you're setting up this pick list idea, keep the data visible so we can check it. In column C, we're going to say, in effect, nobody types anything. Let's go to data validation. Settings, allow, and we don't see the term pick list, but we do see list. And where is the source of that list? Click on the source panel here and go highlight the data. Right there. There it is. Okay. 2 ways to use this. We can click here. Here's a drop arrow. We pick the one we want. That's all we do. Down here, same idea. Different person, so on. If you're using the keyboard, if you've come here, press Alt down arrow. You see your choices. Come to the one you want. Enter. We can do it that way too. Now, what if we add a new item to the list? I'm going to put the word intern in here. This is a new category. As you might expect, this is not going to be in the list just yet. We don't see it over there. But we can easily drag this upward with the Shift key. In other words, we point to any edge, hold down the left mouse button, and the Shift key, drag this upward. Let go of the mouse first. Now, it will appear before a contract, and if that's what you don't want, in other words, it's before contract. If you want contract above it, then after having done what we just did here, drag this upward, the word contract. Select the cell, drag from the upper edge with the Shift key up here. And now it will be in the order that you wish. If we have more than 8 entries here, we will see a scroll bar. And let's say for the department column, that's where we're headed. Now, think of the huge time savings here we're going to have by not having to type some of these entries. And furthermore, we will have a lot of accuracy, or consistency perhaps is the better word here. We're not going to see different spellings of environmental here, all those bad spellings that we sometimes see. And nobody's going to put a period behind MFG unless that's in the list here, and it's not, or admin, and people will not use the word and here. It won't be acceptable. The problem here might be we are going to have a scroll bar and we've got lots of entries. What if we know ahead of time that the manufacturing group is dominant here? Maybe up to 20% of these entries are going to be manufacturing. Now, we haven't seen the scroll bar just yet, but we're going to have to go scrolling to find that every single time. If we use this as our source in its current form, every time we see that drop list over here, that pick list, if we need to get to manufacturing, we're going to have to scroll to find it. So let's move manufacturing to the top of the list first. All the others, of course, are alphabetized. And that makes good sense, too, because you want to be able to find the others. Most of them we need to find. Manufacturing is there frequently. Maybe you also know that operations is going to occur very often. Drag that upward with the Shift key. So we're sort of saying, in effect, alphabetize this, but make a few exceptions, put these at the top, so we can get to them quickly and easily. So in column D, we're going to do the same kind of thing. Select column D, data validation, settings, list, source. Let's go highlight the data in column H. Okay. Now in column D, drop arrow, there's manufacturing. Remember, we put it there because we use it frequently. We don't have to slide very far to get to that. There it is. Next cell down, maybe it's professional training group, whatever. It's out there. It's alphabetical, so we know how to find it relatively quickly. There it is. Over time, you might, again, consider reordering this. Remember, if later you realize we've got a lot of logistics people too, and I don't like to have to scroll to get to that all the time when I need it, let's drag this one up here also. So you'll be the judge as to how often you want to change the order of this. But now logistics is in the 3rd position, meaning we don't have to go very far to get to it. There it is right there. A great feature. Now, eventually you would want to move this somewhere else. The idea is maybe others are using this. You don't want to leave this sitting out here where others might be able to change it. For some environments, all you need to do is hide the columns. It's probably not the best thing to do. Other situations, it might be okay simply to move this way off to the right, but possibly we could just put this on a separate sheet. Click plus right here, we've got a new sheet. Come back here, take this data, Control X to cut, one way, certainly. Then go to the new sheet, click out there, Control V. Excel will have followed it properly. Let's come back to data validation just to check it out. Click here, drop arrow, we've got our list. If you're worried about somebody clicking on sheet 2, you could hide that sheet. Right click and hide. It's still going to be working effectively. Data validation, come back here, drop arrow, we still have our list. So a very efficient tool. We've seen some variations on how to use it. A really powerful tool for controlling data before it goes into a worksheet. Data validation, found on the Data tab.